Hello and welcome back to Life from the Wrist. Hope you're doing well. Today we're going to be looking at a Bulova manufactured in 1968. The Bulova cover today has been an extremely interesting watch to research. Identifying the model has allowed for a lot of information about historical Bulova models to be discovered. Furthermore, I think this watch is a great example of how Bulova marketed their watches during this time period, which is a time where Bulova really dominated the watches worn on wrists sort of during this era. So to start off, this watch touches across a ton of different models for Bulova, and I'll walk through them, but I think first I'll sort of describe the watch. This watch was manufactured in 1968 based on there's a stamp at 6 o'clock here which says M8, which is the date code, and it dates the watch to 1968, or at least the case. The watch has some very interesting spider-like lugs, which you can see pretty clearly here. Have kind of a gap, at least at the top of the case, which gives it a little bit of depth, but really interesting sort of spider-like lugs. The watch has a 10-karat gold-filled case that to me is in good condition. The lugs that attach to the case you can see angled towards the wrist, which make the watch sit true to size at 31 millimeters. You can kind of get a quick look at it on my wrist. The watch has a signed Bulova crown, which you can see pretty large capital B that sort of, I apologize, capital B that is relatively easy to use. On the crown's relatively easy to use, especially if you wanted to wind it or change the time. Moving to the dial has a sunburst pattern and is in extremely attractive condition with applied hour markers and Bulova logo. The hour markers have sort of a concave design, so if you look at the hour marker at 12 o'clock here, what you'll see is there's an indentation right in the middle of the watch, which provides some depth to the dial, but also if you look at it at different lights, it allows for the reflective nature of light to sort of shimmer on the hour markers. There is a small scratch between 9 and 10 o'clock, which you can see on the left side of the watch there. The watch has its date complication at 3 o'clock with an applied gold window where the date complication is, and I think the window makes the date stand out nicely and matches sort of the attractive look of the dial, as well as the other hour markers that you see, as well as the Bulova logo. Finishing it up, you can see the watch has a center seconds and sword hands. Now with these details, the next step is obviously to try and identify the model of this watch. The first stop is always using what is written on the dial, so you can see 23 joules and automatic written on it. 23 joules is actually a staple for Bulova. In fact, they had an entire line of watches that were part of this sort of series, and we covered an extremely attractive version of a Bulova President with a really cool shield design that has the 23 joules stamped on the dial of the watch. Watchophilia actually did a really great article on the Bulova 23 series, and there will be a link on our article on lifefromthewrist.com if you want to go and see it. I encourage you to go to the first link in the description of this video, and there will be a link to the article that we wrote about this watch, where you'll get links to some additional source material, but also you'll be able to see pictures of this watch, and you'll be able to see things like the inside case back of the watch and movement. But to summarize the article that I am mentioning, the line of watches, the 23 series line of watches, sort of showed up on the market around the mid-1950s and were produced for about 10 years. And there were other watches that had 23 joules written on the dial, but they were not technically part of the over 100 models that were produced as part of the Bulova 23 series. Now, based on the date of the manufacturing of this watch, the date code M8. This likely came after the 23 series, being that the latest advertisement known for these models was around 1963. So this watch was probably not part of the 23 series. Some other research that I found was there was a model that looked very similar to this specific watch, which was the Beau Brummel series. These watches were made from the late 1940s through the 1970s, so this watch could have been in that sort of time period. There is a version of the Beau Brummel that uses this exact same case as well as the design for the dial and movement, but the distinguishing factor for the Beau Brummels were that the Beau Brummel had hour indices and this watch obviously does not. So with the Beau Brummel out of the way, the next thing that you could use is the complications. So obviously we have center seconds and a date complication at 3 o'clock, and this sort of led to identifying another model of Bulova watches known as the time center. Again, the exact same case layout, but these models actually had Roman numerals for hour markers instead of these applied hour markers that you see on the dial of this watch, and instead of automatic, which you see written at 6 o'clock on this watch, that one actually had self-winding. So unfortunately, it doesn't look like this watch is a Beau Brummel, a time center, or part of the 23 series for Bulova. But cases were often used for many different models, especially when you look across Bulova watches. And so this watch was likely just a standalone model that was produced after the 23 series. And to me, this case is quite remarkable, especially the way the lugs are designed, and I think it can be easily enjoyed on the wrist. Moving on to the movement. The movement is an automatic caliber 10 CPACD movement. This is the same movement that was used in the time centers, as I mentioned, which was another reason why I thought it was a possible match. This caliber appears to have been used throughout the 1960s and really is a workhorse 23 jewel movement watch. What's really cool also is the finishing of the movement. It has sort of that bronze tone to it, like many Omegas of this era, which I think is quite attractive, and it has a large automatic rotor, which is also a really nice touch. As I mentioned, if you want to see pictures of the movement, head over to the article that we wrote about this watch. Now, of course, caseback markings are always have to be inspected with watches like these, and I think it gives you some interesting insights into this watch. And for this, I think it really demonstrates the technology used by Bulova to make their watches as reliable as possible so that potential customers would purchase them. So if we look at the back of the watch, you'll see Bulova written here at 12 o'clock, and then as we work towards sort of 1 and 2 o'clock, what you'll see is 10 karat gold filled case, which obviously indicates the case metal for this watch. If we continue clockwise, what you'll see is shock resistant. This is a feature that became very important for customers or consumers of watches, because without it, watches would become inaccurate due to the shock that it undergoes from movements of the wrist. As we continue down, I already mentioned one of the stamps, but you've got the date stamp of M8 and then the case serial number. And then as you continue up this side, what you'll see is anti-magnetic, self-winding, and waterproof. Now consider for a moment that you didn't have time available as easily as you do now. You couldn't just whip out your phone and see that time. The wristwatch was one of the only ways, not the only, but one of the ways to have time and and so having a reliable watch was really important for consumers. And so all the things that are sort of stamped on this case back are ways to demonstrate the reliability of their watches. And I think it makes a wearer at ease with this watch on, knowing that they don't have to worry about winding it because it's automatic. They wouldn't need to worry about its accuracy because it was shock resistant, waterproof, and protected against magnetism. And so when Bulova would showcase this watch, I can imagine that they really would be able to abate any concerns that a potential buyer would have just by the features that this watch had. Now, of course, just because this watch ticks all the boxes regarding reliability doesn't mean this watch was not an aesthetic choice by a potential customer. I think the case design really gives the watch a bit of an edge over some other sort of simplistic time plus date models. I think the sunburst dial also is really attractive, and I think the gold applied hour markers make telling time extremely easy because of its legibility. And to me, there's an art to making simplicity beautiful, and I think this really does tick a lot of the boxes. As I mentioned, 31 millimeters. It sits fairly true to size given the way that the lugs angle towards the wrist. Overall, I think it has a fairly nice look to it, and sits nicely on my wrist, but of course 31 millimeters isn't the right size for everyone. Competition, I think, during this time period was fierce, as it is today in the watch market. And if you ask yourself sort of what was Bulova's way to compete in this market, it was really to showcase the reliability of their watches and produce beautifully designed watches that matched a lot of the fairly robust, reliable qualities that their watches had. I hope you enjoyed taking a look at this really interesting Bulova manufactured in 1968. I think the overall design of this watch is extremely attractive. It was really cool to see, to research, as I mentioned. You know, there's so many different models that can come up with this sort of, this case design, this sort of dial layout, but hopefully we narrowed it down enough to provide you with some helpful information about this specific model in case you come across this in your life. If you don't, I hope you enjoyed at least taking a look at it and seeing what Bulova was doing during the 1960s and how they were really trying to differentiate themselves from other watch companies, given the immense amount of competition that the watch industry continues to have, had then and continues to have today. Overall, a really beautiful watch, and a really interesting history, especially for Bulova, who was so popular during this time period. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you think about this watch. Let me know in the comment section below if you've come across watches like this, or maybe you've come across the time centers or the Beau Brummels. I'd love to hear your thoughts if you have come across any of those models, so let me know in the comment section below. If you want to see some more pictures of this watch, read the articles that we've mentioned throughout this video and see images of things like the caseback markings and things like the movement. There will be a link, it will be the first link in the description of this video to the article that we wrote on lifeonthewrist.com about this piece, so be sure to head over to that link. If you are new to Life on the Wrist, be sure to subscribe to the channel and share this video with a friend who might be interested in watches. And if you wouldn't mind liking this video, it really does help the channel out. With this said, guys, thank you so much for watching this video, and until next time.